Hello and welcome. This is Working Class to World Class. But before we go any further, I do have a little favour of you. If you could hit that follow or subscribe button, then that would be a massive help. Thank you. Now, in this episode, you are in for another treat. I'm catching up with one of the world's most famous creatives, but before he got there, he was a little working class lad living in a really kind of rougher part of East End London. But now, as I say, he's one of the most famous creatives worldwide. He's won tons of awards. He's worked in the biggest campaigns. He's an all-round good guy. You have to check it out. Breaking through the barriers of adversity. I'm Lynn Lester, and this is Working Class to World Class. I'm absolutely excited to welcome my guest for today. It's a man who is a legend in the advertising industry. He's worked in so many campaigns that you'll recognise: Pepsi, Cadbury Cream Egg, Wholesome Pills, Toshiba, Ariston, and I could go on and on and on. I think you've worked it out. Yep, it is Dave Trott. See what I did there, Dave? Did you like that?
Yeah, very good. Nicely done. Nice intro.
Yeah. So thank you so much for being part of this. And I've been really excited to talk with you because the whole premise of this is talking about that working class journey, coming from nothing to being something.
Sure.
And the one thing that strikes me about you, and you can validate this or not, is I get the sense that you're really proud to have come from working class roots. Yeah. Is that kind of fair to say that?
Oh, 100%. I mean, it's me and my wife are both, she's Chinese, she's Singaporean, but her mum and dad are working class too. And it's, they work their way up, and it's, and all my family, I've got like 38 uncles and aunts from the East End of London. So it's all, it's just, I mean, and once everybody talks about London, and you know, when you hear Scots people, they'll say down in England, and they've got the privilege of England. It's nothing like us. You're talking about people like Boris Johnson, which is maybe 1 million people out of 50 million people. You walk the East End of London is twice as big as Scotland. Yeah, working class people like me, and that's when you say England, you actually don't mean the Daily Mail. You mean the Sun. People like me. Yeah,
you're totally right. And it's funny when you said people like me. Do you think even after all your success, we talked about some of your campaigns there, do you still in your head consider yourself as being working class?
Hell yeah. I mean, there's, money, you can be rich working class, but I mean, I'm not going to be middle class, am I? That's my wife, as I say, she's Chinese and she's from Singapore, and she had to teach me about the English middle class because I never even met any growing up. You might meet a doctor, or you might meet a bank manager, and that would be as much as you'd ever, apart from the TV, that would be as much as you'd ever. Don't forget, there's 8 million people in East London, and they're all working class, and that was our country. We never saw people, middle class people like David Cameron or Boris Johnson or people like this. The working class, it's Paul McCartney. I've heard him say the same thing. It's in your bones, and you can make a lot of money and you can be rich, but you don't suddenly become like my wife had to teach me. Because in Singapore she was taught by posh teachers, posh English teachers. So she had to teach me about the English middle class when she came here. I knew nothing about. I'd never been to a restaurant. I'd never working class people don't go to restaurants. You don't. I didn't know anything about all that. So, what knife to pick up or fork to pick up, or when you're in a restaurant, they put an empty plate in front of you and you have to help yourself. I'd never ever had that before. Where I'm in working class, the food's on the plate when it comes in, and you eat what's on your plate, and that's that. And the nearest you get to a restaurant in my day would have been a Wimpy bar. Nowadays, it'd be a McDonald's or something. That'd be the nearest we ever got. But working class people don't go to restaurants. Why would you spend 2 or 3 times, 4 times for that amount of food what you could than if you ate it at home? It's just maybe today it's different, but in my day, as I say, the first time all my uncles and aunts went to a restaurant was when my wife took them to a Chinese restaurant when she wanted to meet them all, and they all put on their best clothes. The men all put on suits and ties, and all my uncles and aunties and my mum and dad had all put on their best clothes to go, because to go to a restaurant was something only posh people did. You'd see it on the telly. But so, you don't just suddenly lose being working. Well, I don't think you do, no, unless you want to, and I don't want to. So.
Absolutely. It's funny you should say that, because I actually, now we go to restaurants and stuff, but when I was younger, I can't actually ever remember my mom and dad taking me to a restaurant. And I always remember, like, if we did get a Chinese, that was like a big deal. That was like if we got takeaway. But my dad would always say, it's probably not PC now, because my dad would be in his 90s now if he was still here, but he would say things like, oh my God, you don't know what you're eating, you don't know what you're going to get. And he was very much about mince and potatoes, and it was all about putting, lining the bones and all this. But we never ever went out.
Exactly. That was like how I was brought up. Food was just fuel. You ate. I knew what day it was by what I was eating. Yeah. Mum knew 7 dishes, and so if it was Monday, it was bubble and squeak because it was left over from the weekend. Tuesday was something with Yorkshire pudding, and Thursday was always pea soup and then bread pudding for afterwards. And Saturday was always beans on toast. And Friday was always fish because everybody went to fish and chip shop on a Friday. I think that might have been a religious thing one time. And you knew it. And when I was a little boy and you go to school, Mum would give you a shilling so you could get school dinners. But I think most of us didn't go to school dinners. We went round the chip shop and we got a couple of some chips and a couple of cigarettes. And that's all that. If you know about the working class, it will make you, guys like Jamie Oliver will make you laugh when he's all worried about what working class people are eating, when the whole thing, is, are they eating at all? Not Marcus Rashford has got a better understanding of the working class than Jamie Oliver does. Jamie Oliver's middle class, but with a Cockney accent. And I've always found in advertising, what's great, and this is why for working class people, for working class kids, there aren't a lot of working class kids in the business. If you understand something all the middle class kids don't understand. The middle class kids are doing ads for their Oxford graduate friends, their Oxbridge graduate friends. And meanwhile, half of the country, better than half of the country, doesn't understand what they're doing because they're working class. And if you're working class, you've got this whole chunk to yourself that all these middle class kids don't understand. And you understand the people that are actually going to the supermarket and buying the product. If you are doing ads for Lidl or Aldi, you don't need a middle class university graduate for that. You need a working class person for that. Maybe if you're doing ads for Waitrose, maybe you need a university graduate for that. But Lidl and Aldi and Tesco sell a lot more than Waitrose, and the Sun sells a lot more copies than the Guardian. So I think there's a great lack of, everybody tends to think that you have to be an Oxbridge graduate, a university graduate with a liberal arts degree to work in advertising. And the huge opportunity is to not be like that. Those guys don't know what they're doing.
See, that's a breath of fresh air, isn't it? Like just what you're saying, because I think, and we will come to talk about the industry, because I think, it's underrepresented, definitely people like us and people are working class. But if we were going to sort of take you back to the beginning, then you obviously grew up in a council estate.
Yeah.
And what was that like?
Boring, really, really boring. It was the biggest council estate in Europe. It's called the Becontree Estate, and it's East London. It was for everybody that got bombed out in the war. All of East London got flattened, so everybody got moved out to. It's between Barking and Dagenham, and it's it's a massive now. All the people loved it to bits because they all got their own bath. They all got their own running water indoors. They all had their own toilet. Each house had its own toilet. They're all identical, and it's one massive, massive estate of identity. But the people from the East End, my mum and dad's generation, loved it to bits. It's like they dreamed of this, having their own. Every house has got its own toilet. Every house has got its own bath. You haven't got any hot water, and you haven't got such things as fridges or washing machines, but you've actually got, you can turn on a tap in your kitchen and get water. You haven't got to go down out into the yard to get it. And you've got your own toilet that you don't share with anybody else. And once a week, you've got your own bath that everybody can have your own without sharing it, So we all thought that, well, I mean, I don't know. I didn't know any better, but I grew up and thought that's what the world was, because that's all I ever saw. But it was boring. Man, it was boring. And all anybody ever talked about was what was on the TV last night, Coronation Street or whatever. And nobody ever read any books. Nobody ever went to any art galleries or anything like that. And it just wasn't on our radar. And you'd have been laughed out of you'd have been laughed out of the pub. No one would even talk to you if you started talking that. But it was only my Uncle Harry, who'd been in the army in the war. He'd come back and he picked up a little bit of this from the people he'd met in the army. And he would take me up to London to the Tate Gallery, and my sister too. And he would show us books that we wouldn't otherwise read. And he'd play music that we wouldn't otherwise listen to, maybe some classical music, maybe some modern jazz, things you just wouldn't even hear. And I realised there's a world outside this council estate, which all you'd ever hear on the council estate was same old pop records and same old conversations about what was on the telly and what was in the paper. And but there's an entire world outside this council estate, and that was what fascinated me. Just getting out of the council, just not so much physically off the council estate, but just getting your head out of this. I didn't care if I moved out the council estate or not, but just getting your head into this world of ideas, of art and of music and of books and of an entire world of stuff that as I say, I'd never seen before. And anyway, when I was 15, 16, I went to work in a factory, and it bored the arse off me. I thought, I can't do this for life. I cannot do this for life. Every day I'd get there up past 7, 8 o'clock in the morning. You work straight through, half an hour for your dinner. We called it dinner, now you'd call it lunch. Half an hour for that. And then back there until 6 o'clock, just in the same factory at the same lathe every day. I thought, I can't do this for the next 50 years. And so I said to my dad, can I go back to school and do A-levels? And then I can maybe get a job as an architect or something out of the factory. And Dad, bless him, said, yeah, okay. And my sister had been to a better school than I went to. My big sister was smarter than me, and she went to a better school. And that was the only school in our area where you could actually do A-levels. And although I'd failed my 11 plus and I'd gone to a really bad school, they said, because of my sister, they would let me go there and do A-levels. So she'd been head girl or something at that school, and she was really sporty and used to play hockey and track and won lots of things. So my big sister was the reason they let me in anyway. So while I was there, suddenly I met all these boys and girls. I was a year older than them because I'd been in a factory. But all these boys and girls that introduced me to this stuff I never, ever imagined. All the girls introduced me to art, Modigliani, Picasso, Impressionism, post-impressionism, just a whole world of art. This was the girls. And then all the boys were introducing me to writers, James Baldwin, Kerouac, things I'd never seen. And the guys were introducing me to music, proper blues, Sonny Terry, Brownie McGee, Muddy Waters, just things I never, ever imagined. And this was the world that I'd seen. And from there, I thought, actually, now I don't want to be an architect. Now I want to go to art school. And so I went to East Ham Tech to do a foundation course. Before you go to proper art school, you have to do a foundation. And I went to East Ham Tech. And funnily enough, I later found out I was at East Ham Tech at the same time as Ian Dury was at West Ham Tech. I don't know if you know Ian Dury.
No.
Oh, okay.
But I'm going to check him out now.
He's one of my heroes, Ian Dury. But he's the guy that pretty much invented punk years before punk. But he's much, much better than punk. I mean, Anybody who knows Ian Dury. He'd be, if you crossed Cockney pub singing with Noel Coward, I'm not doing him justice. You've got to hear Ian Dury. Anyway, so what you had was an explosion of working class kids coming from art school who just suddenly the middle class just couldn't keep it down anymore because there was just so much contained and locked up and imprisoned creativity that just blew out, where people had never been allowed the chance to express all this stuff, and nobody knew it was all happening, and the whole of the working class just became this massive area that nobody had ever seen before of creativity and things you didn't, like you saw it from the Beatles. The Rolling Stones were kind of middle class, but the Beatles were working class, and most of the kids from Liverpool were working class, and this explosion of and so that's what happened to me. And then I wanted to be a fine artist, but I wasn't very good, and I applied to 7 art schools and got turned down by all of them. And my big sister, was in New York by this time, and she said to me, and this is like where if you're blessed, as a boy, if you've got a big sister, you're really blessed. My big sister said to me, she really believed in me. I mean, everybody's telling me I'm stupid and thick, and my big sister said, Dave, they're crazy. They just don't know enough to understand it. Let me help you get a scholarship to come to New York. So she did, and she helped me get a scholarship to go to art school in New York, which took it to another level, which was, in New York, they understand rebellious is actually a great thing. In England, where I was being trained, rebellious was a really bad thing. You were supposed to fit in. You were supposed to do what you were told. It was why I kept failing at everything, because I didn't fit in. And when I got to New York, I didn't fit in, and I kept questioning everything, just the way I had in London. And suddenly, that was just exactly what they wanted. And so I went from art school, and then I moved into. Then I wanted the art that was around at the time. The fine art was pop art, Andy Warhol, Rosenquist, Wesselman, these guys. And I looked at that and I thought, well, the way to go is graphic design. Is that pop art comes from graphic design. So like Cassandra, the French great graphic designer, I'm going to move into graphic design. So I did. I moved across into graphic design. And then when I was doing that, guys like Milton Glaser and Seymour Kvast. And then I found advertising, and in that was right at when advertising was bursting with help working class creativity in New York. Help Bill Bernbach and all the guys from Brooklyn, and just burst. What was happening over here with East End creativity was happening in New York with Brooklyn working class creativity, and I just took to it like a duck to water. Everything you learn growing up on a council estate, which the middle class don't learn, is you learn how to outthink other people, just what you call street smarts. Yeah. And you're walking out, as soon as you walk out your front door, you've got to think, now, how do I make sure I don't get had over? How do I make sure no one takes advantage of me? How do I make sure this, blah, 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 blah. If you're middle class, you never have to think of that. No one's going to hurt you. But if you're working class, you've got to always be thinking. And what I found in New York was exactly what they wanted in the advertising over there. It was brilliant. It was all working class street smarts, not dressed up like that, dressed up as, intelligent, but I was actually outthinking other people. How do I outthink the competition? How do I outthink, if I'm Heinz, how do I outthink Cross and Blackwell? If I'm Avis, how do I outthink Hertz? If I'm Volkswagen, how do I outthink Detroit? And it was everything I'd learned growing up in East London put together with everything I'd learned in Brooklyn. And when I came back to England, I brought that back. And because over here, they were still in advertising over here, still doing posh middle class, I thought, these guys are so easy to turn over. They don't know what they're doing. I'm 5 years ahead of them. They're not going to be where I'm at for 5 years. They don't understand working class street smarts. And I've talked since then to other guys like David Bailey, Peter Mead, guys like they all kind of went through the same thing, which is just what you learn growing up with street smarts without even thinking about it. You automatically brought that into advertising, and because everybody else wasn't, they were all middle class. They had none of this, and it was so easy to outthink everybody. And hey, not only that, if you're working class, you're the only one there that's like that. Everybody else is like a zero. You're like an X. You're automatically different. You've got this whole area to yourself. Whereas if you stay in the East End, everybody else is just like you, so you're not different. But if you move yourself into all these middle class guys, suddenly you're different just by being yourself and just by what my dad called using your loaf. You and I was talking to these kids, these black kids from Lewisham, and they all wanted to get into advertising. And what they were trying to do was to learn to speak correct English and wear suits and ties. And I said, no, man, you're doing it exactly wrong. You're trying to pretend to be like white middle class Englishmen. Well, they've already got hundreds of those, and they're all better at that than you are. But what they're not good at is what you can do. If you can do, what you can do is working class street smarts. And they haven't got that. When you come out of your area into the middle class area, just being working class gives you a massive advantage because they're not.
Yeah.
So
that's so true. Yeah. I mean, see, the thing is as well, did you think, because you were obviously working class, you were good at what you were doing, did people sort of treat you differently because you were working class in a kind of derogatory way?
At first, yeah, sure. And that's okay. I'll roll with that. I mean, one of the things you learn at school when you come from a rough area is how to laugh at yourself. If you can't laugh at yourself, you're going to get beat up a lot.
Yeah.
So very quickly you learn to be funnier than the guys that are laughing at you. And like I was reading what Nora Ephron said about it, the American writer. She said that if I fall over and everybody laughs, then I lose. But if I tell a great story about me falling over and everybody laughs, then that's my laugh and I win. And that's what you learn growing up in a bad school. Is a lot of guys tougher than me there, and if I take myself really seriously, I'm going to get beat up. So what I do, what a lot of comedians do, is you learn how to be funny really fast, and you learn how to laugh at yourself. And I can make fun of myself better than you can make fun of me. And the tough guys can't understand that. How why is everybody laughing at him? And they can't get angry because I'm making fun of myself. So when you get into, as working class, when you get into the middle class, to your question, and do they treat you as differently? Yeah, they do, but that's okay. I mean, you've already learned how to handle that. And what you're constantly thinking is, how do I turn this to advantage?
Yeah.
I'll tell better jokes about me than you can. You want to tell jokes about working class? Yeah, I can do that.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I think the thing is as well, you're right. It's about, it's almost like not taking yourself too seriously. And I think actually working class myself, you learn to fit in. It's really weird. Yeah. I feel so if I'm with my friends or my family, I might speak in a different way to what I would do in business, but my mind is still the same and I'm still the same person. I don't behave differently, but I can adapt. Yeah. To just settle in where I need to be at that time. And you've probably seen that your whole life, I guess, but exactly from what you're saying.
But I mean, I've loved it. It's worked great for me because I'm like, I don't have to be anything else. You've got to be good at your job. I mean, but then your turbocharger is you've got something that makes you different. You don't keep telling everybody, hey, look at me, I'm working class. But you've got to, but when you sit in a meeting, you've got a different point of view to everybody else. I've got 7 middle class white guys there that'll all say the same thing. Now here's something you haven't heard.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's a diversity that we often underestimate. At the moment, obviously, there's diversity in lots of forms. It's obviously colour, it's race, it's male, female, and these are super important. But I think you've just touched on that. Working class people can bring a lot to the table that a lot of people don't realise we can.
Well, Idris Elba, yeah?
Yeah.
So Idris Elba was talking about diversity, and he said there's more diversity at Ford's in Dagenham than there is at the BBC. Now, the BBC is all middle-class people who are very patronising about it, and at Ford's in Dagenham, you're all working-class blokes. You haven't got time for all that other stuff.
Yeah.
It's the working class versus everybody else. It's not, never mind what race you are, what colour you are, what sex you are. It's us against all the posh people.
Yeah, no, I hear what you're saying. I mean, when you were sort of building up to that, because obviously you were quite lucky because you got your qualifications and then you had something to prove because you had achieved what you had to achieve and you were in a different place. So you were accepted in a different way. But see, throughout all of that, were they really supportive of you?
Say again?
Were your parents supportive of you?
Well, they didn't understand. Mum and Dad didn't understand it, of course. It's like, I remember when I wanted to go to art school and I'd been up all night doing a painting and Dad had been out, all night working. And when Dad came in about 8 in the morning and Mum was making Dad's breakfast and I'd just cleaning my brushes. And I said to Mum and Dad, I've got a huge painting there. And I said, what do you think of it, Mum and Dad? And they looked at it and they wanted to say something nice, but they didn't know what to say. And eventually Mum said, well, you know us, David, we don't know anything about art. And then they went on. Mum got carried on making the breakfast and Dad picked up the paper. And I thought, well, run this by me. I'm now going to go to art school and spend 4 years studying something that nobody else will be able to understand unless they've also studied it. I don't think I want to do that. I think I want to be doing something that 50 million people can understand. Yeah, the rest of everybody. You don't have to be like a little cabal of art school of artists and art critics and snooty intelligentsia like that. I want to be where everybody can understand it. So that's when I kind of, like I said, I made the switch from fine art to graphics and then advertising. And advertising was for everybody then. And then what was great for me also was being in New York. I left college I was there 4 years at college in New York, and then I left and tried to get a job on Madison Avenue, and I went and I worked and I got fired and I couldn't make it work on Madison Avenue. And it occurred to me, ethnically, I've got nothing in common with these people. I mean, they all look like me and they speak the same language as me, but I don't know who Captain Kangaroo is or Buffalo Bob or Howdy Doody. They don't know who the 66 World Cup squad was, Bobby Moore, or they don't know Dennis Law, or they don't know Alex Ferguson, or they don't know any of the things I know. So culturally, I've got nothing in common. I have to go back to London where everybody's like me. Then I've got what I learned in New York, but I've also got I'm back in the pool with all the fish that are just like me, swimming in the same direction. And then every joke I tell, everything I draw, and I know everybody will get it because I get it. Whereas in New York, I can tell jokes and they won't get it because they don't know what I know. And I'm struggling I don't know anything about American football or baseball or any of the things they know. And they don't know anything about, football or West Ham or any of the things I know. So it was great learning for me that if you're a writer, a copywriter, you pretty much have to be in your own environment amongst people like you. And that's where working class back in London was perfect for me. You couldn't be any more like me. And it was just everything I said was just all of a sudden, it was like swimming in the direction of the current instead of trying to swim against it.
Yeah.
So that was great learning for me too.
That's amazing. Do you know, there was one story that I read, and I want you to tell it because it really made me laugh, was you were saying that when you were in America, you had this girl, and I can imagine you were a man of words since you were very good with your copywriting, so you can tell me about that in a minute. But yeah, there was this girl that you went out with and she invited you for dinner to the family house. Yeah. And it's where they had you, that's where you talked about the empty plate, the food in the middle. How did you feel? Because you were like a duck out of water, not knowing what to do with this sort of posher family.
It's two things. See, being at art school in America, because you have to pay to get there, everybody's middle class. So I'm confused. I'm doubly out of my depth because I didn't know they were all middle class. I just thought they were all Americans. But so I'm only out of my depth because they're Americans and they don't quite say the same things as me and they don't know what I'm. And when I went there, I was a little mod. I don't know if you know about mods from East London. Mods, it was a fashion.
Not really.
Okay. It was a big.
I'm showing my age.
You went everywhere. You had to wear a suit and a tie. And you had to dress really sharp, and so and I got to New York and I was like that. And then all the kids at art school, they all dressed like slobs. And this is New York, and I'm not. I'm used to London art school where everybody dressed like mods, and so they're all dressing like slobs with long hair, but not stylish long hair, just like any old rotten haircut, but grown out. And I'm thinking, man, you couldn't walk around in London like that. Nobody would walk around like that. How can you let yourself? Anyway, so you've got that. And as I say, one time I went to this girl's, her mum and dad had asked, she said the boy she's going out with, bring him home for dinner, which by dinner, they don't mean in the middle of the day like me, they mean the evening. And so I went round and I thought it was the American way of doing it. I didn't know it was the middle class way of doing it. Is you sit down with an empty plate in front of you. And then there's several knives and forks. And they think because I'm English, I'm probably a relative of the Queen. So they all think I must be really posh just because I'm English. And I'm thinking all this must be how Americans do it. And actually, truth is, it's just middle class. And then the food comes in and it's put in the middle of the table. And I think, well, what do you do now? And I'm watching everybody else to see what they're doing. And they gradually begin helping me. And I'm thinking, okay, that will work. And then I watch to see what knife and fork they pick up. Make sure I don't pick up the wrong one. Because like I say, in the working class, where I've been, it always comes in from the kitchen already on the plate. That way it's fair. Everybody gets a fair share of it instead of all fighting over it. And and in this thing in America also, you got a glass of water with your meal. And I don't know what I'm supposed to do with that. We've never had a glass of, we had a cup of tea with the meal, but never a glass of water. What's water for? And if you had water, you might have some orange squash in it. But just plain water, I don't know what to do with it. And you had this odd thing where all these things that I just didn't get was that's how, and the middle class is common to America and England, but then you've got English and I found I got on much better with American working class blokes who were more like me, guys from Brooklyn, than I did. I don't know. Do you know anything about punk music?
A little bit.
Have you ever heard of a band called the New York Dolls?
Yes.
Okay, so my mate, who was from Brooklyn, he was the bass player in the New York Dolls.
Cool.
After we got out of college, he went to, he did industrial amounts of drugs. But that's where he wanted to go. So, I mean, art school, loads and loads of people end up in rock groups from art school because it's creative. It's a misnomer. When you call art school, you shouldn't call it art school. It's creative school. What it does is it opens your creativity. So you can do anything you want from there that if you went to university, you couldn't do. If you went to university, you're trained strictly to do geography or you're trained strictly to do English. One thing you're trained to do. If you go to art school, you try everything. When you come out, you're just bursting with different forms of creativity. And that's where it's great for working class blokes. You don't have to know what you want to do going in. When you're in there, you'll experiment. And you might start a rock group. You might find other guys who want to start a rock group. You might find guys who want to paint, guys who want to be into film, guys who want to be into photography, illustration, writing, all of those different things. And you're not going to know until you've tried them all. And that's the great thing about art school for me is, especially for working class kids, you can try everything and just see where you don't have to know going in what you're going to want to do.
Yeah.
Whereas at university, it seems to me much more like a very rigid. You do this one thing and you come out and now I've got a geography degree. What do I do with that? Well, I don't want to work in geography, but I've got a degree, so that must be good for something. So now you go and do something that's nothing to do with what you studied. Whereas at art school, I use what I learned at art school. It might be typography, it might be photography, it might be film, it might be animation, it might be, but because I'm on the creative side, every day it might be lyrics, poetry, writing, but every day it will be something that I used at art school. Whereas university kids don't do that. They got this, university is kind of like A-level plus, whereas art school's a whole new world.
Yeah. I can imagine. I remember once, so I did actually get into uni once. The reason that's got a bit of a story, I remember going and it was business, and the reason I'd done it is I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I wasn't particularly smart, but I just got enough to scrape in, and it wasn't the best uni either. It was a kind of sort of middle of the ground, in middle of the road. So anyway, I go to this uni, and within 1 year, the teacher said to me, you don't want to be here, do you? And I was like, no, because I was spending all my time drinking cider and blackcurrant in the union than I was going to, and I didn't want to spend the money on the books. I thought, oh my God, I got a bursary. Why would I want to spend it on books? And it was just my mentality at the time. And I remember leaving because I think the way you felt at that factory, I just felt bored stiff. And I thought, I can't possibly do this for the rest of my life. I don't like it. And I think that's why it's quite funny, because the roles that we both do, you don't have the same rules imposed on you, because I like to be free in my thinking. And something that you had said before, which I think is so true, and I think it's a real tip for people listening, is it's not being working class that sort of stops you doing stuff. It's your mind of possibilities.
Well, absolutely. And that's why I think middle class kids go to university, because they think they've got this belief that if they just get a degree, doesn't matter what it's in, a degree will see them through. Now, the truth is, if you know you want to do geography for your whole life, then fantastic. You should go to university and study it. But you shouldn't just go and do geography because you don't know what else to do, and you've got to get a degree, and a degree in geography is as good as a degree. It's really 3 or 4 years wasted, because when you come out, you've got to start again. Whereas, so I was talking to this kid before he was waiting for his A-level results. He was doing an intern at the agency, and I said to him, "What you're going to go to?" He said, "I'm going to go to university." And I said, "Okay, what you going to study?" And he said, "Geography." And I said, "What you going to be, a cartographer?" He said, "No, I hate geography." I said, so why are you doing it then? He said, "Well, I'll get my best A-level results in geography so I can get into a better university." So I said, "Well, what do you want to do when you get out?" He said, "Well, I don't know, but if I've got a degree, then I can think about it." And that seems to me that all you're going to do, I guarantee, if you decide you want to work in film, you're going to go and be interviewed by someone who got that job at 18 in film, and now they've been working in it for 4 years, and now they've worked their way up, and they'll be interviewing you, and they haven't got a degree, and you have. Yeah. 4 years on the job. If you don't know what you want to do, but you know you want to be, all I knew is I wanted to do something creative, something exciting, something different, something unusual, something not on the council estate. Well, I didn't mind living on the council estate. I just didn't want my head stuck on the council estate.
Yeah.
And art school for me was just fabulous. It was like opening it up to all the things I didn't know what I wanted to do, but I knew it was going to be something creative. So that's when art school was fantastic.
So it's amazing. Do you know, when I was growing up, I didn't even know that certain jobs existed. So I didn't know what an editor was. I didn't know what a copywriter was. I didn't know this world. So for me, what we knew is you grew up, you might work as a receptionist, which, by the way, nothing wrong with any of the jobs, because some people are very happy in them. But for me, that's what I thought you had to do. You were a receptionist, you worked in a shop. I remember working in the sports division. I worked in a sports shop, and that kind of bored me as well. But, but I appreciated everybody else that done that role, because it was to make ends meet. But it was nothing was really broadened to me. Like at school, I didn't learn about all these sort of things or ideas or creative, because at school, we teach our kids, as you said, do as you're told, you follow the rules, don't talk out of line, you do what we tell you, and it really hinders all chance of creativity. So I think you were really lucky, weren't you, that you and you had your sister's influence behind you.
No, 100%. Not only that, being in New York at the time when the counterculture was getting a grip, and the counterculture had got a hold of advertising. So Bill Bernbach had revolutionized half of advertising. Half of it was still the crappy old Mad Men kind of gin and tonic advertising on a golf course, and to crank out some rubbish. And but Bill Bernbach's half of it was the exciting part of advertising that you wanted to be in, the just having fun and doing ads that would run, that people would love, that were actually a contribution. It was the modern version of art. In the Renaissance, they would do stuff and they put it up and people would love it and you'd feel fulfilled. And advertising then was the modern version of that. We would do stuff and it would run on the TV or wherever, and people would talk about it, or they'd tear out the ads and pin them on their walls, or they'd be singing our ad or whistling it on the bus, or school kids would be singing it. And you feel like you're part of life, part of 50 million people. You're actually getting into the stream. And contributing to people's lives. And that's when I was really lucky. I talked to my wife about it. That's when we were really lucky to be in it. That was like a golden time for advertising.
Yeah, I can imagine. I mean, I think the thing is, it sounds to me as if you fell into your passion of being working class, because what you're saying is you're doing a job now, and you had your career where you were helping other people. You were selling product, right? But you were entertaining people. You were coming up with really memorable jingles and slogans, and and I just think your work just epitomizes kind of what you are as a person, but right for the brand, if that makes sense.
Well, yeah. See, the other thing I loved at the time, don't forget, when I opened my own agency, two things nobody else would touch was students and youngsters and working class people. So I thought, this is fantastic. I've got a whole opportunity here to build an agency for all the creatives could be rebels and rejects, the ones nobody else wants. And I can get them. And if they've been fired or they can't get a job from all those posh middle class agencies, they'll be desperate to work at my place. And it's true. And the ones that were best were the Northerners from Yorkshire, Lancashire, Newcastle, Yordies, because they'd come down to London for no other reason than to get a job. And they couldn't go back home without a job, whereas the Londoners were a bit more lazy because they had lots of friends down here and everything like that. But the Northerners, they were just wanting to work. And so I'd be like, okay, yeah, that's okay. That's all I want too. I want and a little spark of anger is no bad thing, because it makes you want to do that in your ads, to poke everybody in the eye with the ads. So that when there's 6 posters in a row, mine's the one that's going to poke you in the eye. So you won't see the others. You won't see the other 5. And a little bit of attitude is no bad thing. And the Northerners had that, and they were desperate to succeed, and they'd work night and day, and they were kids that had been rejected by other agencies. And we built up an agency that was full of rebels and rejects. And it was really, really good for 10 or 15 years. It was like the anti-agency to all the other posh middle-class agencies. And all our work was like that too. And which is great, because if everybody else is doing it, I mean, what you do is, instead of trying to be like everybody else, the opportunity is to be the opposite of everybody else. Fish where nobody else is fishing, there might not be as many fish there, but you'll have them all to yourself, instead of fighting with everybody else to fish in the same bit of pond. And so that's what we would do. And we were voted, like we did, just these kids and rejects. We were voted Agency of the Year, and then New York Ad Magazine voted us most creative agency in the world. And we were just, everybody wanted to, well, all the kids wanted to work. And suddenly everybody said, hang on, all these kids we've been rejecting, all these students, actually, maybe we've been wrong. And suddenly everybody started wanting to get young people and students working for them. But they didn't understand it. The whole trick is in the hiring. It's not just getting young people in, or it's getting hungry people in. Yeah. And it's like I would say to them, it's kind of like, if you think of it as boxing, if you tell me you want to be champion of the world, that's okay. I've got the knowledge to make you champion of the world, but what I can't do is make you do the work. If you're knocking on my door at 5 o'clock every morning to do the running, then this will work. But if I've got to be knocking on your door at 5 o'clock in the morning, this won't work.
Yeah.
So the trick to hiring is you get really hungry, desperate people, kids. And if you're hungry and desperate enough, then I can certainly tell you how to be great. I can do that bit. But you've got to provide the hunger and the desperation and the energy. And if you can do that, I can do the other bit. That's
lovely. Yeah.
I was watching a program on William Wallace last night, and it sounded kind of similar, But they sounded great. What they didn't have was a guy like me telling them what to do. But they had the energy and the hunger and everything you need. And it actually sounds like the guy that could have won it all for them got killed at Stirling Bridge. The guy called Murray.
Damn.
If it's great to Wallace wasn't actually the brains. He was the energy, but Murray was the brains. And Murray got killed when they wiped out the British Army, the English Army at Stirling Bridge. That was all down to Murray, but Murray got killed at the same time. That was why afterwards at Falkirk, Wallace lost. Wallace had the energy and the desire, but he didn't have the brains, and you need both. And what I'm saying to the kids is, I can be the brains if I'll tell you how to do it. If you just provide the energy and the desire, that's all you've got to do. And being Northerners, they had no problem with that, and with an attitude too. And it's if you read, it's why any of the great football managers all come from Scotland. You know, Shankly, Busby, Ferguson. They make great sergeants. And I used to have on the wall behind my desk a quote from Napoleon. And Napoleon said, "Generals don't win wars, sergeants win wars." And Scots make great sergeants because they can take 20 rough soldiers and make them do what they want. And that's exactly the same with a football manager. You can take 20 rough footballers and they'll be more scared of you than they are of the other team. That's what Ferguson was great at, you know?
Definitely.
Well, Ferguson used to run 3 pubs in Glasgow. I think after that, you're not going to be scared of 20 millionaire football. Yeah.
That's fair enough. Do you know, it's funny you talk about the whole sort of hustle and the need to win when you're working class, because I think when you come from nothing and you don't have it, when you start getting it, or you can see it in your sights, you don't want to lose the opportunity and you go for it. And I always remember, so I must have been about 23, 24, and my son had been born, and I had been made redundant from a company I was in, and I was very lucky to get in that as well. And I remember when I went for the interview with the Drum, where I still work now, and I always remember chatting to the CEO, and I said, you know what, you might have lots of other candidates. I've got a son, and I'll never work any harder than, or I'll work harder than anyone that you could employ. Because for me, by that point, I had lost my parents, so I could never lose a job. That wasn't even a possibility. I had to pay my bills, or we were homeless. That there was just so much on my shoulders I couldn't lose. So for me, and I did, and I held true to my promise. And we're super successful. As you know, the team has obviously helped do that alongside me. But from your point of view, I never wanted it more than I needed it, because I had been made redundant. I didn't have anything. I had a short window to get something. And gosh, even if I had to do cleaning, I would have done anything to keep a roof over our head. But I didn't want to do cleaning. I wanted to get a kind of decent job and build a career. So I'm totally with you on that. And I think what's really nice about you is, because of where you came from and what you can see in the working class people, is really nice to hear in, especially the advertising industry, that you were bringing in, as you say, the rebels and rejects. Because actually, I have the debate with people sometimes where we talk about, or they'll say, we'll employ someone with a degree. And I've had the argument of, but what's the point if the degrees of no use to the job that you're employing them for? And often I get hit with, well, it just shows they work hard and they've got a work ethic. And it's just really interesting. It's such a comparison, viewpoint from us.
Well, all those kids, those working class northern kids that work for me, and had all been fired or couldn't get a job with any of those middle class agencies, they all went on to either open their own agencies or be creative directors elsewhere. So all you had to do was train them. If they got the energy, like you say, like yourself, the energy and the desire, and all you want is someone to point you in the right direction. So someone to give you a break. And so I'd go in every weekend. I'd go into the office every weekend, take my wife, take the little kids, would have been 2 or 3 years old then. And I'd just go in and to do a little bit of work, take them in with me. And all the kids were in there working. All the little northern youngsters were in there working. And it's because your job is your fun. And it's not like, you're doing this like a prisoner. You're doing this because it's more fun than anything else you could be doing. What else are you going to be doing? Sitting at home watching telly? Going around the shops? This is more fun. And if you get this right, come Monday morning, you're going to have some ads that will actually run. And how are you going to feel like that when you walk down the tube station and see your poster on the other side of the tracks? Or when you call up your mum and dad and say, hey, watch TV at 9 o'clock Wednesday, my ad's on. You know, there's no more fun than that. And so it's not work. It's actually being allowed to do what you went to art school to get trained for to do. You know?
Yeah. No, absolutely. And the thing is as well, it's like what you were saying before, like I just don't feel you've ever lost the sense of who you are. And you can tell, I mean, immediately you can tell as I talk with you. And there was another funny story that you, again, it's if I've been stalking, I've been reading all your blogs and stuff, but there was a really lovely story you told where, is it Bobby Smith, who's a Spurs player? And it was one day, two guys were in painting your front room, and the other guy said, do you know who this is? And you were obviously, you know, this superstar guy who, and I think his picture was on your bubblegum wrappers and stuff.
Absolutely.
And, you know, but how did you feel knowing, like, God, this guy was like a legend. I completely admired him. And now he's painting my room.
Well, I mean, I was like 10 or 12 when Spurs won the double, and nobody had ever won the double before. That means you won the FA Cup and the league.
Wow.
And you know, nowadays it will be Liverpool or Man City that will do it. But in those days, nobody had ever done it. And in 70 years of the Football League, nobody had ever done it. And Bobby Smith was the club record scorer, centre forward of that year, scoring all the goals. And then, like you said, then suddenly the guy said to me, "That's Bobby Smith." Fast forward, suddenly, zip, 20 years to now. I'm you know, making the workers a cup of tea before I go off to the office. And he says, "That's Bobby Smith painting your front room." Okay, now Bobby Smith. It's like, you know, every Saturday, you figure every Saturday, this guy's got 70,000 people screaming his name. But because in those days you didn't have multi-million-pound contracts, now he's got to, when he leaves football, what skills has he got? Well, he can drive a van and do a bit of decorating. That's about it, really. So that's all you got to do there. You didn't, you know, live on your £10 million a year or whatever it is Beckham and people get nowadays. You got to go and get a job. Yeah. And that's what the guy is. And I couldn't go bring myself to go up and talk to him, because I'm sure every time he goes to a pub, people must do that. Are you Bobby Smith? And I'm thinking, you know, it's a bit embarrassing, isn't it, poor guy? So, but so I just sort of made him a cup of tea and left it at that. You think you don't want to remind him that he had 70,000 people every Saturday screaming his name, and now you're decorating my front room. You don't, you know. So
yeah, that must have been quite cool. I can imagine it was cool. And for you, like, you know, I mean, and I think you've sort of answered this as we went, but I'd love you to sort of call it out. What kind of one or two principles do you think you've always held on to, being a working class boy that grew up in a council estate, went to America, got your job? There must be certain things that you hold on to that you will never lose, no matter.
Well, yeah, no. One, my dad always told me. My dad was a policeman for 35 years, a sergeant, and then after he had to retire, when I was a teenager, by that time he had to retire after 35 years. And so he taught himself to be a black cab driver in London. And but his first love was always being a policeman. And that was naturally what he always, being a sergeant, like an old time East End copper, you know. And when I was, he said to me, we were talking about it, and when I was at art school, and I'm sort of rebellious, and I'm saying, how can you be a policeman, Dad, supporting the state and everything like that? And he said, well, you've got to think of the purpose of what the police force is. And what the police force is to maintain civilized society. And what's the purpose of a civilized society? So the strong can't prey on the weak. Yeah? So that people who would otherwise be the victims have got someone to look after them. He said, and what you've got to remember, and this is the line that always struck me, they always said, it's the letter of the law. No, it's the spirit of the law, not the letter of the law. And I said, what do you mean by that, Dad? And he said, well, it's just that you haven't got to be like follow the letter of the law like some mindless bureaucrat. You've got to think of what's the purpose of the law. And I said, well, give me for instance. So it's the spirit of the law, not the letter of the law. And I said, well, give me for instance, Dad. And he said, all right. He said, if I'm doing my rounds and 2 o'clock in the morning, he said, I notice the door of the baker's is open. So I go in and I look in and I catch a bloke and he's filling a sack up with bread. And I said, what you doing? And he said, well, I've got no job and I've got to feed the family. And we've got no food, we've got nothing. I've got to feed the family, I've got to feed the wife and kids. He said, I look at him and I think, well, what's the purpose of me being a policeman? It's to maintain civilization, right? And what this bloke's doing is looking after his family. That's what a civilized society, that's what you should do. So I say to the bloke, all right, I wasn't here for 10 minutes yet. You've got 10 minutes to fill that sack up and hop off before I report this. But make sure you only take bread. You don't take any money, don't take anything else. Feeding your family. That's the spirit of the law. He said, mind you, if I come along at 2 o'clock in the morning, he said, and there's a bloke opening the safe and taking the money out, I'm going to nick him. Because that's not the spirit of the law. He's doing it to taking someone else's money to make himself richer. He said, and I'll do him for that. But a bloke looking after his family, that's what I'm here for. And that's my job, is to support society. And that's fair. And as a copper, that's what you should be doing. So, and that's a very working class. That's very East London spirit of it. That's what my dad would say, use your loaf. You know that expression, use your loaf?
Yeah.
Loaf, like loaf of bread?
Yeah.
So those are two things that I picked up from Dad always, is use your loaf and the spirit of the law, not the letter of the law.
See, I just love it. I mean, I could talk to you all day. I think we could talk for hours, actually, and I think we should actually catch up. I'd love to hear more of your stories. But for you then, before we wrap up, and I've got a couple of things to ask you, what would be your advice then? So you get working class, or maybe they're not working class. You just get someone that's a wee bit lost and they're trying to sort of make a name for themselves. They're trying to get in the doors of the places to get the career, but the doors are kind of shut on them because they don't have the degree, perhaps, or they're an unknown, they're just a random person. Is there anything that you would sort of encourage people to do to get noticed and recognised?
Well, you got to figure this is advertising. And what you've got to do is get noticed, because if you're going to do ads, you've got to get noticed. So what I did, and I mean, you use whatever tools you've got around. And if you've got no money, you've got to use tools that are free. So what I did when I came back from America, I didn't know anyone in advertising in England. I knew nothing about it. But I had my mates worked in, one of them worked in a bank in the city, a merchant bank. And he said, well, I've got to get some money because I'm living with mum and dad, and I've got to, bring some money in. So I said, well, he said he'd help me get a job as a messenger in the bank. So I got a job as a messenger in the bank, and then I thought, okay, now I need to get myself known really fast around all these, ad agencies. Well, I'm going to do the same thing as everybody else. You cart your book around one and phone up, make an appointment, cart your book around one agency at a time. If I can do one a day, I'll do 5 agencies a week. That means I'll do 25 agencies a month. That means if I want to do 100 agencies, it's 4 months. And all that time I'm not earning, and all that time I've got to find tube fare, and I'm bringing no money home to mum and dad. That's terrible. That's stupid. So what I did, I thought, well, let's use what's free. Well, what's free is I'm a messenger here, and I know they've got postal service free in the bank. So what I'll do is I'll go to the yellow pages, look down all the names of the advertising agencies, mark them off. I've got a portfolio. Let's Xerox it down to 8 by 10, everything in my portfolio, and send it off to every name in the yellow pages. I can get it on Xerox machine. I can get it copied because I'm in the messengers department. I can do this for free. My mates will help me do it for free. So we do all that for free. Then I'm in the messengers department. I can use their mail service for free, so I can send it to every agency in London. And so I sent 50 off straight away, and within a week I had 20 answers straight back. 30 didn't bother answering. Oh, that's fine. That means they're not interested. What's important isn't getting a yes. What's important is getting an answer. Even if it's no, that's better than no answer. Because a no answer will keep you stuck. It's like a maybe will keep you stuck. A no is okay because I go the other route. A yes is good, but a no is also okay. The only wrong answer is maybe. So I want yes or no. So I got 30 that didn't come back, so they're automatically no's. And I got 20 answers. 18 of those were no, but come in and we'll give you some advice. Well, I'm not really interested in that, so that's also no. So that's 48 no's. And then I got 2 that said, well, we've got jobs. Would you like to come in for an interview? So, hey, how's that? In a week, I've got 2 pretty much interviews, whereas otherwise dragging my ass around interview after interview after interview, doing it the way everybody tells you. No, I'm not interested in what everybody tells me. If I'm any good, I've got a better way of doing this than the conventional way. I didn't go to art school to do it the conventional way. If I'm creative, if I'm any good, I'm going to think of a better way. So I got 2 now, as it happened, those 2 job offers. One was from John Webster and one was from Peter Mayle. And I didn't know they were the 2 best anyway. Everybody else was looking for people that did it like everybody else, which would have been terrible for me. These were the 2 guys that were looking for someone who didn't do it like everybody else, which was happened. As it happened, it was perfect for me. And if you shake things up, you get your answers really fast. And so I shook it up, got 2 answers. And what came out of it was Peter Mayle was the guy who wrote a lot of books about Provence, A Year in Provence and all these books. Eventually, anyway, he was the creative director. And that was a press agency. And John Webster, I didn't know at the time, but he was a TV agency. Neither of the names meant anything to me. And I asked a guy called Len Weinreich, who was one of the ones who had replied and said he'd give me some advice. I said, well, I got these 2 job offers. As I'm a junior, I suppose I should go to the press agency, because all I've done is press ads as a junior. And Len was really smart. Len said to me, I wouldn't do that. He said, if you go to the press agency, everybody's going to be fighting for press, and you'll get squashed under the crush. He said, if you go to the TV agency, they'll all be fighting for TV, and you can do whatever press you want because nobody will want that. And I'm fantastic. So that's what I did. And it worked perfectly. Nobody wanted to do all the press ads, trade ads and things like that. And I had loads of trade ads and press ads. And I was doing many, many more than the people because all I want to do is work. And I'm doing many, many more than the people that have gone to the press agency I would have done there. Usually, again, it shows you doing the opposite of what you're told. Doing the opposite of what conventional wisdom is. This isn't university. This is supposedly creative. So you don't do it the way everybody tells you. Take your portfolio and go around the agencies one at a time. No, that's what everybody's doing. The last thing you do is what everybody's doing. Why would you be just another one of everybody else? The whole point is to be different. So, like I said, I was prepared to do 300 or 400 of those. And then later on, fast forward 20 years, 30 years, my son's come out of art school because our son and daughter both went to art school and they both work in advertising. And that my son wants to get a job. And he said, what do I do? And I said, well, the old way I did it is with the press room. But nowadays, things have moved on. You don't have to do that nowadays. You've got internet. So what would you do? So it's all right. What you do is you write a letter, you get all your work down onto a portfolio on the internet, get yourself a website, write a letter, put it with your website on the internet, and then all you do is you change the name at the top every time. And you can send it to, I said, every day I'm going to come home from work, I'd expect to see, I don't know, 20, 30, 40, show me that you've done that many. If I can do that many, you can do that many. Anyway, at the end of a week, he'd done 300. And he got 2 job offers out of it. But what it shows you is you can't go for one interview. You can't do one letter and get 1 job offer. You've got to do 300 to get 2 job offers. So that's roughly 1%, which is give or take roughly what I got. If you know you're going to get a 1% return, go for 50 times what you want. Don't write one letter and then sit there waiting for this letter and I'm waiting a week. Is the postman going to come? No, man. Turn this around so it's in your favour. I'm going to do 100 letters, and then I'll choose which of the jobs I pick after that. When I find who's got, because if you haven't got a job, I don't need an interview. We're going to turn this around so that it's on my terms. Now, if you're working class and you come from the bad side of a big town, you've been doing that all your life anyway. If you go and buy a used car, you don't do it on their terms. You turn it around so it's on your terms. You're always dealing so that it's on your terms. Naturally, you don't need anyone to tell you that. That's just how you and your mates. That's how you grow up. And so now you do that in advertising. Don't do what the middle class people tell you to do. Turn this around so it works in your terms. If you're creative, how can you think about this? Now, if you can't do it, well, then maybe you shouldn't be creative and maybe you shouldn't be in the business, and I can't help you. I'm only talking to the ones who can hear what I'm saying.
Yeah. Well, I don't think there could be any more better advice than that, to be honest. And before I let you go, I can't resist but ask you this. So Pepsi, the lip smacking ad, was probably one of my favourites from over the years. Can you remember? I'm sure you can.
First ad I ever did, yeah.
So tell us the slogan.
It was the first ad I ever did because I was a kid there and the brief had so many things on the brief and I couldn't get them all into it. So I just wrote it down. There's one long list of everything that was in it. Lip smacking, thirst quenching, ace tasting, motivating, good buzzing, cool talking, high walking, fast living, ever giving, cool fizzing Pepsi. Because I was trying to get everything into a line. And
amazing.
And then I went to John Webster, and what's a great lesson? If you get a decent boss, John Webster said, "Have you got anything?" And I said, "Well, I've only got this thing." And I read it out to him. And John said, "I like it." And I said, "But nobody else is doing anything like that." And John said, "That's exactly why I like it." Now that's the sort of reaction you want. You want a boss that says, "I want this because nobody's doing it," rather than a boss that says, "Let's do what everybody else is doing." If you're that kind of person and you want to do what everybody else is doing, I can't help you. But there'll be some people listening to this who don't want to do what everybody else is doing. Like you want to get your brain out of the council estate, and you don't want to be like everybody else. Those are the people I'm talking about. Like much later on, 10 years later, I went to John Webster and we were doing courage. I was doing Courage Best Bitter. And John said, "What do you got?" And I said, "Well, I got these guys called Chaz and Dave, and they got this song called Gertrude, and I think that's really good. And I'd like to use that for it." And John said, "How are you going to film it?" And I said, "Well, just an ordinary in colour, I suppose." And John said, "No, let's do it in black and white." And I said, "Well, why would you do that?" And John said, "Well, nobody else is doing it." And that's exactly the kind of attitude you want. Nobody else is doing it. If you've got the insecurity that you need to do what everybody else is doing, and you can't be creative. You've got to have the I want to do it because nobody else is doing it. That's the opportunity. That's the fun. That's where nobody else is. And of course it's insecure there and it's risky and it's scary, but that's the fun. You know?
Wow. Well, thank you so much. My God, I've learned, even myself, I feel I've learned so much, and I'm not really a creative as such. So, yeah, thank you so much for that. I think you're probably going to, it's no doubt you're going to inspire millions of people with this. And thank you for being part of it.